Well, hey everyone, we're super excited to come back. Actually, this is a part two, so if you haven't seen the first one, don't worry, it's recorded. You can watch that one later. But today we're going to talk about two awesome projects, Fluent Bit with DataPrepper, how they work better together. I'm again, as Austin mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Calyptia, now field architect at Chronosphere, and I'm joined by Kevin. If you want to give a quick intro as well, Kevin.
Sure. Name's Kevin Fallis. I'm a principal search specialist. I probably should have changed my title here. They're always changing names for us. But I work with the OpenSearch service and the open source community and do all things OpenSearch. And so one of the areas that we always like to leverage are the agent processors and the forwarders and the collectors that FluentBit provides and FluentD. So looking forward to sharing some of the stuff today and showing a demo. Pray no demo gods show up, and we'll go ahead and get her kick off. But today's agenda, we're going to walk through getting started with Fluent Bit and DataPrepper. We're going to talk about, why do we use Fluent Bit with DataPrepper? How's it a segue into, some of the things that we do on AWS? And all the stuff you see today is going to be Kubernetes-based open source. So we are using DataPrepper and not our managed service option on AWS, which is OpenSearch ingestion. And we're just going to show you how that all is set up. And we'll get some logs flowing. We'll have a demo in there and sort of walk you through how you change those configs. And then what we're going to do is an overview on transformations, filters, and redactions. When you look at Fluent Bit and when you look at DataPrepper, they do have some very similar goals, and they do have some very similar attributes. And what we'll do is try and clarify why you would use one over the other when we get into that, and how you leverage the power of the transformational, the filtering, and the redaction capabilities in both of the toolings. Next, we're going to put it all together and show you kind of what the architecture is and what we have in place and what we're going to change to. And then once we do that, we're going to show that inside of the demo and show a little bit of Fluent Bit talking to DataPrepper. And in the end, Anurag and I'll open up the Q&A, and all questions are welcome. I believe there's a chat window, so any information or things that you want to understand, go ahead and throw it in the chat session. We have that dedicated time in the end so we can go through things. But I'll go ahead and I'll turn this over to Anurag, and he can talk about his favorite toy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. So Fluent Bit, I'll do a quick intro again. There's a part one where we go much deeper in, show a bit more of a demo. But really, Fluent Bit is an open source project that is part of a foundation. So part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It's Apache 2, very permissible. Part of the graduated Fluent project, very heavily used by many users, cloud providers for all sorts of things. And you can read the rest of the slide, but I think some of the stuff that is going to be really useful in context of today's demo of like how do we think of these two technologies together and why FluentBit is really effective is with its lightweightness, right? If I give you a little bit of history, right? FluentBit was created back in the era of IoT. So like 10 years ago, IoT, your washing machine, your fridge was connecting to Wi-Fi networks, and all that stuff was put together, and under the hood it's all running these embedded Linux pieces, and Fluent Bit was actually built in that medium's mind. So how do you go deploy data collection for these microcomputers on all sorts of IoT devices? Well, it just so happens that 2014, 2015, right around the same era that containerization took a huge spike, and that same super lightweight, high performance data collection that was needed on these IoT devices actually mimicked very much what folks wanted in containers. So that's really one of the reasons why FluentBit has done so well is super purpose built. It does logs, it does metrics, it does traces, and allows you to plug into so many different formats, whether it's OpenTelemetry, Prometheus, Windows, Linux, Mac, and keeps a very lightweight profile. So making sure that you're not consuming too many resources as you're doing that collection. So yeah, it's excited to show how that all works together, but we go next slide. We can talk a little bit about the OpenSearch project, and I'll let Kevin go through this one.
Certainly. So, I hope everybody's heard about the OpenSearch project. It is an open source community driven project. Um, as we've noted here in the slide. And what's nice about it is, even though we've forked from Elasticsearch version 7.10.2 and Kibana 7.10.2 into OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, we have these additional projects that we have that go on with OpenSearch, such as the plugins that you see in the OpenSearch engine through OpenSearch dashboards, and also in other tooling, such as what we're going to talk about, which is DataPrepper today. So DataPrepper is one of those addendum projects for OpenSearch. And what it was initially built for was to, essentially create an ETL mechanism for the stuff that we see for logs, messages, and traces in the OpenTelemetry spec. So in the end, with a combination of OpenSearch dashboards, and DataPrepper, we have a solution that can interface with open source agents, such as the stuff that is found in Fluent Bit or in Fluent D. So all of those have a very purpose-built actually output plugin, which was introduced probably about 2 years ago, Anurag, I believe. And so
Yeah,
it's built specifically for OpenSearch. So now you can just choose that engine configuration and all the stuff that you need is all set up in there. And so in the end, we use these three tools to interface with Fluent Bit to give you an overall end-to-end pipeline for ingesting things. So now while DataPrepper does some ETL value-added features, some of the new things that have come out are the ability to basically write to Amazon S3 as a destination, because in the beginning we only had one source. I mean, only one sink. And we talked about sources and sinks while Fluent Bit talks about input plugins and output plugins. They're all similar concepts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here as we dig into the deck. But in the end, now we can actually write data out to S3, and we can also emit it in Parquet format. So there's some new things out there that now enable you to start interfacing with data lakes. Another thing, too, that we also have in DataPrepper, which we're probably going to cover in another session with Anurag and myself, is some of the aggregation mechanism or streaming processing. So while we were not going to cover that stuff today, just keep in mind that this is an evolving area. It was initially built for OpenTelemetry, but now we're starting to extend that architecture for places where we see that we need to fulfill specific gaps. Now, Fluent Bit does a really, really great job of having, a bazillion output plugins and a bazillion input plugins, and we use it on our Windows projects and Linux projects. It works fantastic. In the end, we look at DataPrepper as that one additional thing that gives us that value add when we couple the two together. So when you look at the whole project itself, OpenSearch is an engine for viewing your data, and we'll take a look at that, or storing your data, and OpenSearch Dashboards is for viewing, and DataPrepper is the thing that ingests for you. So again, we have rich plugins in the OpenSearch community as far as the engine, which talk about observability, anomaly detection, dashboards, visualizations, and whatnot. There's plenty of stuff out there. We're not going to cover all that, but we'll do some very, very discrete things. So now, what is DataPrepper? Again, we're going to see this community-driven open source thing. Many people might get confused and say that, this is an AWS project. Well, it isn't. And if we look across the board and you go to the community page, you will see that it's a collaborative effort between multiple different businesses, very high-profile names too. And we have companies about Logs.io and other businesses in the financial services vertical that contribute because they're very open source proponents. And given that they're running data centers and other things like that, in some cases they're not on the AWS cloud, they could be on somebody else's cloud. They need that open source community, and they foster that. So while we're a major contributor, we're not the only contributor to the project. So keep that in mind. And if you all want to join in, and you might be contributing to Fluent Bit right now, DataPrepper is another area where you can play. But again, it's a plugin based solution. There's filtering, enrichment, transformation, normalizing the data, aggregating, redacting, and all these other good things. Now, again, it was purpose built for trace analytics and log analytics workloads back in the day with the OTel spec. but we do see a lot more traction with AWS services and more of that log analytics, event analytics workflow coming to play with the solution. Now, what it does at a very, very high level, it uses pipelines, and that defines a workflow that consists of typically a source, a buffer, a processor, and a sink. And in the end, that's what helps you prepare your data and deliver it between your source and destinations, or your inputs and outputs, or your sources and sinks. So again, it does support a lot of large and complex data sets. I've seen this at scale, pushing multiple terabytes in a fleet behind a load balancer. So it is built for enterprise workloads also. So keep that in mind when you're looking at things. Now, the solution that we'll be talking about today is definitely not enterprise. We're going to have very, very few instances in there. It's just to demonstrate the possibility of how you think about this. But in the end, when we walk through this, you'll see that it's a pretty good story here. So when we look at, common attributes between DataPrepper and Fluent Bit, effectively, you're going to have some source or some input that you're going to be reading from. It's either going to be reading off some TCP port, a log file, or whatnot, but you're pulling that in. Typically, it could be a codec or something that's going to parse that to get it into a format that you can work with. And then what it'll do, it will store that information in a buffer. Now, usually it's going to be an internal buffer. There are options for some of, well, at least for DataPrepper, to add maybe an external buffer, such as using something like Kafka in the open source community. But the whole idea behind the buffer is to preserve that data and keep it available. It can either be in memory or it could be on disk. And you're preserving that data so you can take it and push it downstream without losing the data or going back to the file system or your endpoint to get the information again. Why is my click not working here? So what happens is, after you've gotten the data read in and you've stored it, you enrich it, you mutate it, and you redact it. And what this really means is that we're looking at specific fields we may not want to push to the endpoint. You might have some formatting that you want to perform on it, and you might want to change something from, like, it's coming in maybe in a string format, and you want to make some changes to it, maybe add some more decorations to it. And that would be basically in a mutate section. Example of an enrichment would be if you're using Fluent Bit, for example, and you're running on a container and you want to understand what your AWS environment is. Well, it does have a plugin that can read that metadata and tell you what availability zone it's in, and other things that are more detailed about the cloud environment that you're running in. And of course, redaction. When we think about this, it's either masking or eliminating the field altogether, especially if it might contain PII. Then usually what happens is, after you prepared that in a pipeline or inside of your configuration, you're going to route it to somewhere. And a route can be a multitude of combinations. In the case of Fluent Bit, you're going to route to, you could go to OpenSearch, you could go to S3, you could go to CloudWatch. It's a never-ending possibility. If you're on a different cloud, obviously there's other output plugins. But in the end, that's what the sink performs, is that little connection between where you're going to send this data to. But in a nutshell, these are like common attributes between the two that I identify. I don't know, Anurag, do you have any other thoughts or other things to add to this?
Yeah, I think this is great for folks who are thinking like, hey, I want to go use the same type of source, or I want to use input. Like, how do we map these pieces together? I think the other part too is like, what are all the use cases that come up with some of the reasons we've broken these things out into these factors. And Kevin touched on it a little bit earlier, but to add on to it, right? When we think of doing something like a redaction, I think it's really easy for a redaction or like a masking. So say, for example, your application has a credit card number. You don't want to store that credit card number. We want to get rid of that. So that's a mask or redaction. So when we think of like doing that, I think all of us as folks who've seen text and can swipe that away, hey, that feels pretty easy to do. Why do we need 5, 6 different steps to go do that? And the reality is, when you start to expand that problem of doing it at maybe not just one credit card transaction a second, but maybe a million, and you want to do that with error handling, and you want to do that with routing, so you can do long-term analytics with a big data lake on S3, and maybe you want to do some short-term hyper-focused dashboards with OpenSearch. That becomes the reason that you need to break up these things. So it's awesome that you can take the two technologies and they have a similar way of thinking about it. And I think in the coming slide we'll talk about like why do you even want to have both of these? Like, can't we just choose one or the other? Well, actually, it really pairs nicely together when we start talking about things like scale.
Thanks, Anurag. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you know, when you look at this, there are so many combinations, and this is just one of those patterns. You know, keep in mind that we see other scenarios where Fluent Bit, you know, very, very lightweight containers, you aggregate, use it as a forwarding device. You know, Fluent Bit and Fluent D kind of serve this purpose, and it's a well-known pattern. All we're doing is we're taking that same sort of forwarding concept and putting DataPrepper in the mix where you might have had Fluent Bit as the forwarding endpoint for taking a lot of pieces of data or a lot of you know, smaller log entries and putting them together. You know, the true value of having a forwarding mechanism and having like an aggregator or a server-side collector is why we kind of think of DataPrepper as, and Fluent Bit being a client-side collector, is that you know, you can't guarantee, especially when you're not hitting high volume, that the payloads that come from Fluent Bit in this scenario, when I show the demo, the first part of the demo is, hey, I got Fluent Bit tracking directly to OpenSearch. Imagine the scale at 10,000 containers. It doesn't work as efficiently as it could without having some sort of server-side collector to efficiently load your bulk API calls before you write them to OpenSearch. And that's typically we will put an aggregator or a collector in the mix. So in the end, and every time I move my thing, I lose my focus thing on here. But when we start talking about ingestion scaling, you know, the typical pattern is to collect the data at the edge, be as lightweight as possible. And, you know, some companies, and it really varies. Like I see this pattern. Some people will be very, very heavy on the transformations and all of the logging changes and the redactions, and they'll do that on the client side collector. But when you start looking at things, keep in mind that each one of those containers that you have, they have a little bit of memory and they have a little bit more CPU. And sometimes, you know, if you're not super efficient, you have some wiggle room to do some other things. And they're system administrators and DevOps people that actually prefer to do almost all the processing as far as the transformation and the redaction. And they like to do that at the edge because you have access to certain pieces of information. For example, I won't be able to use DataPrepper to get the data about the container image and where it's running as far as an availability zone without using the plugin for AWS metadata. And so, you know, when you start looking at that, it is really going to be a trade-off onto if I can use all the available resources on the client side and do a bit of work, I don't have to have as large a fleet, and I can almost be a pass-through processor, which all it does is just route, maybe drop things on S3 and Parquet format, and put things into OpenSearch, and then you have a smaller fleet. By working with these two, you can optimize your ingest architecture. Now, Fluent Bit does have that lightweight memory footprint, and it does make it very, very suitable for client-side collection activities. And in fact, you know, when we look across the board, I see a real prevalence of customers leaning on Fluent Bit, you know, compared to a lot of the other agent offerings out there. Now, if you look at that and we compare, well, we don't really compare here, but if we talk about what the other alternatives and options are, there's also, you have the Beats ecosystem with Elastic that have the lightweight agents, and they push the Logstash, and that is a similar analogy between Fluent Bit and DataPrepper if you want to think about it that way. But in the end, when you start looking at scale, you need to have that gathering, right? And so the server-side collector can shift the functions where you might have a GeoIP database sitting on Fluent Bit and actually pull that in closer, because maybe you're adding and updating things and it really gets painful to push updates to 10,000 containers, and it's better just to do a smaller fleet of data preppers, or if you're using Fluent Bit as a server-side collector, do the same thing there. But in the end, DataPrepper provides that server-side collection activity, and it does help stabilize OpenSearch. So when you have like 10,000 containers running to an OpenSearch cluster, they're all emitting different various payloads. Open search engines, elastic search engines, they like stability. And what I mean by stability is consistent payloads, consistent ways that you move the data from the source to the destination. And that's where you get the true value of optimizing your architecture by using a framework like this or a pattern like this. So when we put it all together, what we're going to do here in this demo environment, when we talk through it, right now I have Fluent Bit talking to OpenSearch. And we're going to reconfigure that so it can talk to DataPrepper, and hopefully I can get everything in time. And let's hope that no demo gods come and hijack me. But in the end, Fluent Bit is going to be reconfigured to talk to DataPrepper. And then DataPrepper is going to talk to OpenSearch, and then it's going to talk to OpenSearch Dashboards. So let's go ahead and jump into the demo. And I will go ahead and grab a couple pieces of information in here. And I got all my notes. All right. And let's go ahead and get myself into some of the configuration stuff. So I just want to point out that we're leaning on some examples here that's in the open source side of the house. Now, we aren't going to be doing anything that's Apache logs or anything like that. But if you do need references for DataPrepper and Fluent Bit, we do have some examples here on the DataPrepper open source project. And, I can go ahead and copy that and put that here in the chat window. And you all can navigate there as needed. But there's a wealth of resources in there and examples that you can borrow from. And these are some of the same examples we're doing in this demo today. Now, when we look at the setup here, I am running on Kubernetes, but it is hosted on AWS. So you will see me navigating through an AWS console here and grabbing and working with the containers using our systems manager. So we do have a lab out there that I borrowed from. It's basically called When Life Hands You Data. You can use OpenSearch. And so we do stand up a little proxy instance so that you can jump into that through our SSM agent without exposing yourself to SSH or, bad password management. And it gives you a really secure connection in to start, playing around with the cluster. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect into that and get a terminal session going so we can have some commands. And hopefully this doesn't time out on me. Everything's already sort of pre-installed. And give me a second here to get back to this. Go full screen on that. Now, when I installed the environment, I am using a load balancer to, host my endpoint. And so when I installed this, I basically have an application. And so in this application, I can type, interesting things. So the whole thing around Movie Geek is that Kubernetes stand up. We have an OpenSearch open source deployment. We have DataPrepper. We're collecting some logs and some telemetry. And we have an application called Movie Geek. This thing's gone through multiple iterations. Back in the day, it was PHP and some manually coded HTML. And, finally, we got some people on board that actually knew how to write, front-end clients rather than me or somebody else hacking away, because I'm a server-side guy, and I prefer not to be on the front end, but on the back end side of things. But what's nice about this is that I can come in here and I can type multiple commands and search for things, like, stars. And it'll bring up all these movies and other things like that. I can look for things like, say golf. And so what'll happen is that as I'm typing here, it's going to pick up this information. It's going to take these logs. And it's going to send it through Fluent Bit to OpenSearch right now. And so what we have then is in my OpenSearch in my OpenSearch setup, I'm using the same database for my data. I'm actually using the same backend OpenSearch cluster to host my application and also to collect my logs. And so If I look at this across the board, we install this little application thing, and I'm basically looking at the last 2 hours to see what kind of things people have been searching for. And so in the end, if we look at, what did I work? I looked for Star, Terminator, Golf. What the power of this is this taking those logs that we took from the Movie Geeks application in a Fluent Bit sidecar, and we're taking those logs, preparing them, and pushing them in using Fluent Bit itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at that Fluent Bit configuration right now. And just go cd ls-l. And so when I unwind everything, it basically installs into a folder called K8s. Please let me know if this is not large enough. Let me try and get my screen just a little bit larger here. And there we go.
Oh, that's much nicer, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to make you all squint. So in this, we have Kubernetes running behind the scenes. So we go kube control, ctl, and get pods. And so the architecture of this right now is that I've already installed the DataPrepper behind the scenes. There is some traces coming from Jaeger and other things like that that are being emitted right now using DataPrepper. And I'm going to actually just use the same instance of DataPrepper to go ahead and write, my Movie Geek sidecar. But if I look in here and I and pardon me, you'll see me going back and forth with my notes because I just don't have all this in my brain. It is, we're gonna pull in, it's a config map. So let me get the config map. So that's Movie Geek config map. So let's go to the directory here. So cd mlbie geek. 1 second, probably already in there right now. cd k8s, cd mlbie geek. So ls-l, and let's go less my default Movie Geek geek config map.yaml. So all this config map.yaml is we're taking what would have been a manual configuration, and we're using Kubernetes just to seed the stuff in. You can actually take these same configurations in your own configuration files. You can include configurations. You can do a lot of other things, but we can see when I'm looking at, the configuration here, there's a couple different options, right? And I'll talk about what I know, and I'll turn it over to Anurag to talk about some of the other things that you can do in here. But what this really is just a configuration that enables me to pick up those logs that are sitting on the instance that's hosting my Movie Geek application. And so when we look at it, we have an input section, we have a service section, an output section, and a parser. And I'll let Anurag talk about what those all do. But the key things here is that we are doing a tail on the local file system. So what you normally do is you provide a path to the logs and some other information. So usually there is going to be like a checkpoint file or another thing that says, hey, this is what I've read already. I don't need to worry about it anymore as you're rotating your files. And so it helps, when you restart your containers or things that happen and you have to do something where you restart maybe the service itself, it's going to pick up where it left off at. Now, what we want to do is we want to take these log files and we want to emit them in a JSON parser format. And we'll refer to that parser inside of the configuration. By using that name of JSON, it knows to go and pick up what the format is, grabs a time key so we can understand events in time so that I can actually log and map and see this time series information in here. And, it also then gives me other things for controlling, what the size is on my buffer, how I deal with some of the formatting of things and how I think about, grabbing the data, getting into, the final output plugin. And so what happens now after I've defined my input, then I have the output for OpenSearch. Now, this is using that OpenSearch plugin that Fluent Bit provides for you, that was built about two plus years ago with Cliptia. And this is what we use to talk to OpenSearch or OpenSearch ingestion. Now, what we're doing here is when we say match, it says anything I have in this input section, regardless of the tag, go ahead and match it. I could technically take this tag, says Golang, and put it in here, and I can have multiple outputs that take multiple different sources. And in the end, I can do multiple things in the pipeline. But all I'm doing here is defining where the host is through some environment variables in Kubernetes, setting up TLS, suppressing other information. I'm using a log stash format so that my rotation of the indices come out properly. And the name of my log is Movie Geek Logs. Now, when I go and I look at this and I go into DevTools, which is a developer tool for OpenSearch, what I see is I have some data out here, which is basically my Movie Geeks log. Right now, I have about 7,695 entries. I had a little ticker running in the background generating a bunch of random stuff. I did some of the Terminator stuff myself as a final. But in the end, what that format is going to give you Movie Geeks logs to use a date timestamp, and it's to do the year, month, day. And this is a typical pattern that we use for logs. So in the end, we can see that I have logs rolling in there. And when I go, hold on a second, too many tabs, not enough time.
As you're bringing that up, Kevin, one
Yeah.
thing I noticed in this config that I think I'm calling out is it is deployed as a sidecar. And so for those who are aware of like containers and Kubernetes environments, there's two main deployment patterns. You can deploy as a daemon set, which means you're reading all the containers as one log source. But in this case, we're actually deployed as a sidecar. And when we go back to like, hey, these things are doing similar things, but like, why do you want to pair them together? The natural resting place of Fluent Bit of like from a memory and CPU side is so low that it can be deployed as a sidecar without impacting too many resources, right? So it's really, really efficient and it makes things like this type of architecture possible. We can deploy it as a sidecar. It's reading local log files. It's routing to OpenSearch, right? And then route to DataPrepper, which can be a bit more a bit more powerful, has all of the scaling stuff that Kevin was talking about, maybe load balancer and everything around it too.
Cool. Yeah, and that's it's one of the nice things that I like about you have multiple options with Fluent Bit on how you want to deploy these, either on containers, compute, on AWS, EC2, other cloud providers, whatever their different compute offerings are. And I've actually seen some interesting patterns where people are actually taking Fluent Bit and jamming it in Lambda as part of the Lambda's extensions, which I'm exploring that pattern. We have something that writes to S3, but I want to write to OpenSearch and completely, use a direct integration inside of my Lambdas. But I digress here. Let's get back to the business here. So we can see that, I have this this configuration in here. Normally, normally what you're going to do is that if you do make changes to the configuration, we have these nice little commands called, kube control apply. In this case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replacing the config map for Movie Geek here shortly with the setup for DataPrepper. So let's go ahead and look at a DataPrepper configuration here and sort of show you how that's set up. Because right now we are writing to OpenSearch. I did a little bit of work earlier to take the input and define an endpoint for my Fluent Bit sidecar to talk to DataPrepper itself. So this can involve two things. We're going to alter the configuration of the Fluent Bit sidecar by introducing a new config map. Now, so in this new config map that I have something called DP for DataPrepper. I'm kind of lazy like that. And all we're doing in here is And I should have renamed this instead of output OpenSearch. I should have just called it, output data prepper. But in the end, to talk to data prepper right now, because we don't have like a first class named thing other than we do have something called OSIS. When you look at the AWS extensions for this configuration, actually, let me just jump to that real quick so you're not wondering what Kevin is talking about here. But when we look at the configuration reference for Fluent Bit itself, when I go in here, so the HTTP output plugin, and usually I go back to the reference here into the manual. We are on version 3.0. This particular lab picks up all the latest and the greatest. You see a broad range of configurations in here. Really all we're concerned about right now is because I don't have any authentication set up on DataPrepper, and I'm not using the AWS version, I'm using the open source version. All I really have to concern myself with is a host and a port, a URI. So this helps when we're processing to basically, if I'm listening on an endpoint and I put the URI in there and I have multiple different things happening in pipelines on DataPrepper, it just says for this port, hit this extension or this URI, and on the other side of the house, I'll listen to it unless I'm just using the default, which listens on everything. And so this helps you have multiple pipelines that sit on the same port, and you can do different work with it. And so once you have that configured and set up, I'm emitting in JSON. Since the endpoint on this is HTTP, we take the TLS and the credentials and all the other things off of there. It is a demo. I would suggest in your production environment that you do think about certs and thinking about using HTTPS. It's a proper thing to do, but we're doing a demo right now, and building all the certs and configuring everything else. It's just a little bit more of information. I really just wanted to get down to the point. So and there is something I do need to change in here real quick. Let me get out of here real quick. I just noticed something, and let's just go ahead and VI that just to make sure I am hitting the right endpoint. So what happens when you do demos and you typo it out? This is actually going to be, give me 1 second to find my config here. Where did I have my date? So source HTTP.
And while you're doing that, Kevin,
Yep.
one thing too that I'll point out is right when you combine these two technologies, you can see some of the data prepper config that Kevin was showing. There's a grok parser. And especially if we think about like, hey, I wanted to go into a full Apache 2 suite of tools from maybe what I had before. The nice thing is like when you pair these two things together, you get all of the regular expressions with Fluent that follow Enigurumu, and then you can also follow grok with prepper. So like you can chain those things together. So you do it in the processing and what you might already have, right? So that's another advantage of doing some of these things together and plugging one into the other.
Definitely. To the util config dash .yaml. Does help to have a command here, doesn't it? So, and I'm a less person. I don't know. Are you a more person or a less person or a VI person or a VIM person, Anurag?
Vim, I'm Vim all the way.
Yeah, I just like to say less is more. It's true.
Yeah.
Um, so what we're looking at here right now is the Kubernetes setup for configuring data prepper. So what we do is we have this hotel config map and then a namespace that's on there. And then when we set everything up here, we are doing a little bit of additional work in here, but the one thing I wanted to point out is really the work is done in the pipelines YAML. So in this case, you can see right now I have an entry pipeline, which is for, in the OpenTelemetry spec, a service map. And keep in mind that on the Fluent Bit side of the house, they are very, very similar capabilities for the OpenTelemetry spec. And maybe you can talk about that when I'm stuck here trying to hunt for something. But in the end, what this has is multiple pipelines And so I didn't really want to interrupt what was going on out there, because that would turn into probably a little bit of a nightmare if I mess things up. So all I've really done here to make this particular deployment work, I could blow everything away and just do a minor configuration, but I still wanted my other applications that are sending telemetry to actually work. So what I've done is I then copied this configuration and to intercept the Fluent Bit stuff. So normally what you do in here is that if we go and look at our, setup for DataPrepper, and we take a look at our examples out here, this is a Fluent Bit side of the house, obviously with a couple changes on my side. If we look at the log pipeline that's going to intercept that and take it, I don't really have to specify the path, but we sometimes do, just to make sure we can differentiate things. In this case, I'm turning off, and let me just go ahead and I keep on forgetting that I don't want to make people blind by getting out some spectacles to look at things here. But when we look at this, I am pulling, since I've already done my work, I don't need this configuration section. So all I really need to do is define SSL and the port that I'm going to listen on. And so if we look at what I've done here, is I've set up another pipeline, and I've called it Fluent Bit pipeline. Now, on the source, we specify it as HTTP, and we're going to specify port 2021, which is apparently a default port. And I've turned off SSL, just like I have the TLS verify off on the other side. And it should be really all that you need in here. Now, when I look at the sync side of the house, what I'm doing is I am specifying OpenSearch, and I'm using the information that came from our setup to seed the rest of the stuff in here. And if I want to go back to my same logs, then what I would do is, if I'm replacing these, instead of going to that, let me go Geeks logs and too many windows. And I'm going to edit that. So let's queue out of this one, VI, OTL, and that FB, YAML, and just make sure we got everything all set up in here. And let's go ahead and I. All right, so that should match the same spec, and will match my index patterns and templates that I have on the other side of the house. Now, so what we do here now is we have the spec in here, and I need to then go ahead and apply this spec. So escape :WQ. And usually to do that, I go back to my cheat sheet. And what I'm going to do is I am going to apply this config on here. Now I already applied it. Technically, if you were coming from the old one to the new one, I would have deleted the old OTel config and replaced it with my OTel config FB. But I already did it a little bit earlier to speed things up, because I know that I can be pressed on time here. And then all you really need to do to reload that is to, since nothing else is changing, is to use the command to apply the configuration. And what we'll do is we'll apply that in there. It's been configured. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do our kube control, get pods, to make sure that everything is deploying and up and running. And so we'll give a little bit of time to start up. Actually, I think I need to do a deploy. Let me just get the deployment here and reapply that real quick. So need to edit this, so sorry. So this is going to be called, so delete this deployment and grab that YAML instead. just to make sure that I'm clean here. Sometimes you might get a funky thing where you think you've applied it and it's carrying on, holding on to an older configuration. So normally I take an easy button. I know there's probably a better way, and for you Kubernetes people out there, you'll see that, I am not exactly the most versed in Kubernetes, but I think I know enough to get by. So let's go ahead and paste this in here. So what's going to do is deploy this, and it's going to then apply the information. So in the end, then what I'm going to do is make sure that the pods are up and running. And so that should have executed. Let's just get that. Let's say hotel collector. There we go. Huh. That is not applying right now. Give me a second here. Apply hotel config FB YAML. So we did the delete. Okay. And let's get the pods. Actually, I think I'm missing a command.
You might need to delete the pod for it to take effect of the new config.
Yeah, where's that command at here? I thought I have to do a delete on the pod name. Give me a second here. Get that command handy. Sorry, I thought I had it pasted in here. It's kube control.
Oh yeah, it's a kube control delete space pods, and then the name of that container.
Okay, there we go. This one right here.
That one, perfect.
Collector. So let's just make sure Jaeger agent. I'm sure that's gonna give me some errors on the backside with the other applications, but hey. All right.
Well, we're doing it live. We're doing it live.
We are doing it live. All right, now this is where I would then do the apply, correct?
Yeah. Go ahead and do the apply. See if it picks up that. You might need to you might need that ahead of the create. Let's see.
There we go.
Container creating.
I thought for
Probably.
sure that would restart it, but okay. All right, so now we're up and running, and technically I should be able to be listening on things. So let's make sure now. I already applied my configuration, so let's just go ahead and get the. Let's take a look at the Fluent Bit logs to make sure that there's no noise in the background, and that should be a. Where's
Keeps
my log?
the logs, I think, right up there. Yeah. Oh, it just logs.
Oh, did I just pass by it?
Yeah, kubectl space logs.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
I need to make this full screen so I can see it. Sorry about that. So what we want to do here is I'm going to make sure that so control. All right, come on. Paste. And I don't want that. We want to put the right name in here. So given that this is a sidecar, we're gonna have to do one extra command in here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to grab my movie geek, because this is where I have the sidecar running. And let's verify we don't have any errors in there. And let's paste that. And it's going to want me to put Fluent Bit. Fluent UBT -bit. And so when you have multiple logs in there, you actually have to specify the namespace for the ones that you actually want to capture here. Of course, I want to be able to review them. And so we can see that when it started up, there were no errors in here. So we're assuming things are good to go. If there were errors, we'd expect to see a multitude of errors inside of this. Now, the next thing we want to do is check to see that we've started up appropriately on the DataPrepper side of the house. So this one is its own separate application, and I don't need to specify a sort of a log type that's going to be in there. So let me go ahead and grab that and pull this in. And what we're looking for is to make sure that we don't have any errors. And go ahead, paste this guy here. And so what we'll see is that it's going to set up, it's picking up our you know, our setups. I am for the HTTP source. I'm building a pipeline, and you know, it looks like it's starting up. And for me, this by all means should start sending data. Let's Shift G down to the bottom. Control Shift G, I believe, is the one. Or is it Shift F? Control Shift F. Okay. Control C. Am I losing my? There we go. Okay. Shift G, go to the bottom. Okay. So it looks like everything is ready to go. We have no errors. So by rights, I should start getting logs. Ding, fingers crossed. The big drum roll. All right, let's go ahead and generate some traffic. Let's get some interesting things in here. So my ticker is not running anymore, so I should be able to see some information. Hopefully it isn't too late. And so inside of this, let's look for party. Actually, we don't want to look for that one. I keep on forgetting there's certain things in here that we probably not the best names for movies. So let's look at something like racing. There we go. You know, we got racing stripes, freestyle, and whatnot. So as I am typing ahead, you know, it should be keeping track of that information. But in the end, let's type in another thing. Let's call boats. You know, select me movies around boats, and there's absolutely nothing for boats. How about something about sailing? There we go. All right, so there should be enough data in there now. I would expect to see that, you know, when I look at my last cat indices, there should be some entries in here. And 7695, did I get anything? Let's double check. Boom. So let's look at the discover pane. That usually is the one that's going to tell me the last 2 hours. Looks like we have some information coming in. So there is some data that was emitted in the last hour. Let me just move my thing out of the way. So we can see we have some entries in here. There is a Movie Geeks log. There is a request and some other information in here. So let's go and let's look at the dashboards and visualizations. Oh, there's right there already. But cool. So we see that the events came in, and I might not have been in my top, but I did type in Terminator. I think I typed in golf. There was another one in here, but I think it's only looking at the top 3. And you know, oh, here we go.
Oh,
We can say that I was looking for boats. So we have a working end-to-end solution.
yeah, I really like
So
that too because you can see the term that we expected something didn't result anything, right? And you're immediately getting it back. So, uh,
and of course, somebody copied my URL. Some crafty person on there is having fun with us. But hey, you know, this is the beauty of having a live webinar. But you
yeah.
know, that in a nutshell is the presentation for today.